Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem, Daf 40 of Masechet Ksubis. Friends, Daf 40, okay, so first we're going to wrap up kind of the Mishnah, the previous Mishnah, and then we're going to have two new Mishnahs today. One talks about Boshes and Pagam and that kind of stuff. The other one talks, three Mishnahs. Then, so we talk about Boshes and Pagam and stuff, and then also whatever, like Ones and Mefata kind of stuff. So, alright, let's do it. So we're going to start in Daf Lametesim Abayz, 2 lines from the bottom. Ones Shosa Ba'atzitzo. Okay, so we said that when it comes to Ones, he's got to marry her. So it says, so we say, well, we learn out Ones and Mefata, right, one from another, when it comes to the 50 shekels, right? We said that by Ones it says 50, and by Mefata it says shekels, so we make a shidduch, we say 50 shekels. So why don't we also learn out one from the other, Oichit, when it comes to the fact that by Ones he's got to marry her. He can't just say, you know what, I'm moving on. So why don't we say the same thing by Mefata, that they got to get married? So Amakra, Mahor Yimarena Lo Leisha, Lo Midaito, right? That it says by Mefata, it says that, they can get married, it says Lo to him, Midaito. So it has to be with his sort of knowledge, with his desire, Kilu. If he's not interested in getting married when it comes to Mefata, so he doesn't have to. But then he has to pay a 50 shekel fine. The Mishnah had said, Ketzad Shosa Ba'atzitzo V'chulei. So we said, what does it mean that he's kind of like, stuck drinking from his pot or something? So one of the things that we had said that if, when it comes to Ones, where they have to get married, however, if she is like a mamzeres or something, that's a lav, that they're not allowed to be married to each other, so then they don't, then they don't get married. Amar of Kahana, says of Kahana that he was talking and learning with Rav Zvid min Arda, Nesi Esev Nitchel Osaisi, and Rav Kahana asks, he says, but why don't we say, as we've learned before in the past, Esei Dochel Osaisi, that the mitzvah's essay of Velosia Leisha should override the Losaise of not marrying a mamzeres. So Omar Li, so Rav Zvid min Arda says to Rav Kahana, Heicha Aminon Nesi Esev Nitchel Osaisi. 1 second. We have to understand exactly how Esei Dochel Osaisi works. When do we say Esei Dochel Osaisi? Kigon Mila B'tzaras. For example, bris milah and saras, right? If you have to do bris milah, you have a baby boy who needs a bris, but there's saras in the orla. So what do? So you do bris milah anyways, because the thing is, there's no way of getting around bris milah. Like, it has to be done. So now aval hocha, but over here when it comes to Ones, the amra to lo ba'ino mi ise le'esekla. If she says, look, I'm not interested in marrying you, well, then the whole thing falls apart. Then there is no marriage anymore. And therefore, because, we're not going to go out of our way, to say, Esei Dochel Osaisi, like, I understand that she's a mamzeres and it's a lav, but I have the as mitzvah saseh of Velosia Leisha. But we're not going to go out of our way for Velosia Leisha when it's something that, can very well not actually be a mitzvah saseh, i.e., if she says, I'm not interested in marrying you, all of a sudden there's no marriage to begin with. So therefore we're not going to sort of go out of our way to say, Esei Dochel Osaisi, and they're allowed to get married even though she's a mamzeres. If she just says, look, I'm not interested, all of a sudden there's no mitzvah saseh anymore. So therefore we don't say Esei Dochel Osaisi here. But by Mila and Tzaras, where, bris milah is always going to be a thing, it's not going anywhere, so then we say Esei Dochel Osaisi. Says the new Mishnah, okay, so this is actually talking about two separate things. So a Yisoma, right, a girl who doesn't have a father, or in a situation where you have a girl who got engaged and then divorced. So Rabbi Elazar says by Ones the guy is chayiv to pay the 50 shekels, but by Mefata he's potter. He doesn't have to pay the 50 shekels. Let me think for a second. Let's just explain it anyways. So if you think about a Yisoma for a second, right? So Yisoma doesn't have a father, right? So normally the 50 shekels will go to the father. She doesn't have a father, so the 50 shekels goes to her. Okay, so if she's the one getting the money, so I understand that by onus, she would get the money. She would get the money because it was against her will. She wasn't a willing participant. And therefore, the guy has to pay a fine, and it goes to her. But by mifate, where it was consensual, so then why should he have to pay her a 50 shekels fine? I mean, she said she was okay with it. It was consensual, and therefore there is no fine in that case. So Belazar Omer ones chayv mifate potter. That in onus, by onus where it's against her will, so then the guy has to pay her 50 shekels. But if it was mifate where it was consensual, so then he doesn't have to pay her anything. I mean, she was okay with sleeping with him. Says the Gemara, Omer Rav Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Elazar b'shita so b'Akiva Rabbo Amra. Says Rabbi Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Elazar was in line with his Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva. The Omar that Rabbi Akiva had said, where did he say this? And Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph. Yesh lo knas v'knosa la'atzma. That when it comes to a nara shenis arsav in his garsha, that she got engaged and then divorced, Rabbi Akiva had said in the Mishnah, Daf Lamed Ches, that the knas goes to her. Now, mimai, how do we know that Rabbi Elazar holds like Rabbi Akiva midiktani yisoma? From the fact that it says that in orphan the money goes to her. Rabbi Elazar Omer ones chayv mifate potter. The Rabbi Elazar says that by yisoma in ones is chayav and mifate is potter. Yisoma pshita. Obviously, in that case, onus would be chayiv and mefata would be potter, because by yisoma there's no father to give it to, and it goes to her memele. So then, so by onus he'll have to pay her, but by mefata it was consensual, and he doesn't have to pay her. So elo hakamashmal and denarish in his arsiv in his garsha ki yisoma. Rather, what it's teaching us that Rabbi Elazar is saying that a naira who got engaged and then divorced is just like a yisoma, ma yisoma la'atzma, afnarish nisarsiv niskarsha la'atzma, that just like by a yisoma who doesn't have a father, the money goes to her, so also narish nisarsiv niskarsha, a nara that got engaged and then divorced, the money goes to her, and that is just like Rabbi Akiva had said, and Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, in the Mishnah. Amr B'Zera says, B'Zera Amr Bar Shilai. What? Amr B'Zera Amr Rav Bar Shila, Amr Rav Amnuna, Sava, Amr Rav Ada Bar Hava, Amr Rav. Okay. Halacha Rabbi Elazar, that halacha is like Rabbi Elazar. Okay. Kai Rav Alid Rabbi Elazar Tovina de Chakime. Very interesting. I don't really know what to do with this, but Rav said about Rabbi Elazar that it was Tovina de Chakime. I don't know, a very fortunate sage. Okay. I'm not really sure what to do with that, but okay. Tovini de Chakime. Says the new Mishnah. Ezu boshes akolfi amavayish v'amizbayish. So how do we evaluate boshes, embarrassment, right? When it comes to onus and mefate, so we say in addition to the 50 shekels, he also needs to pay boshes and pagam for the fact that he embarrassed her, for her embarrassment, as well as pagam for the fact that he sort of lowered her value. So boshes, embarrassment, is relative to who you are, right? As we're going to see in the Gemara in a second, right? That there's differences between a bas melachim and a bas idiotis, right? The daughter of a king, her embarrassment would be a lot more than a regular person's embarrassment. Pigam, and also when it comes to pigam, sort of like a decrease in value. So we view her as if she was like a slave woman who had to be sold in the market. What was her value before this incident, and what is her value now after this incident? And the Gemara is going to explain what that means. Right? A fine is the same for everybody, or no, probably the fine, right? The fine when it comes to onus mefate is equal for everybody. 50 shekels fine, flat, it's a fixed price for everybody. Whenever the Torah gives a fixed price for something, such as over here by onus mefate, 50 shekels, so then shavu b'chol adam, it's going to be the same for everybody. For everybody, it's 50 shekels. Says the Gemara, one second. The Gemara, maybe when the Torah says 50 shekels, it's 50 shekels total. It's not 50 shekels baseline plus boshes plus pigam plus sa'ar by ones plus and then I guess whatever. And then there's the knas, which is the baseline. Right? So the Gemara, maybe the 50 shekels is total. Maybe the 50 shekels is total. Reb Zera says, Reb Zera, no, the 50 shekels can't be total. It's 50 shekels plus boshes plus pigam, because if we say 50 shekels total, then I don't understand. Yomu Baal Bas Melachim Chamishim, Baal Bas Adjotus Chamishim. They'll say it makes no sense. How could it be that if this guy does onus umefata with a princess or with a regular girl, it's going to be the same 50 shekels? That can't be. It doesn't make any sense. Therefore, it must be that in addition to the 50 shekels, there's then boshes and pigam, which, at least boshes could be a relative payment. And, the boshes, the embarrassment will be more significant when it comes to bas melachim as opposed to a bas idiotis. Amalei Abai. Abai says to Reb Zera, it's a schwache argument. It's not such a starke argument. It's not such a strong argument. Amalei Abai yochi gabi eved nami. What about by the fact that when it comes to a slave, right? If you kill a slave, so then there's a 30 shekels fine. Yomru, Eved Nokiv Margolio Shloshim, Eved Ose Maisim Achat Shloshim. The people will say, I don't understand. It's a flat rate of 30 shekels for an Eved, no matter what, whether he was, whether he was a jeweler or whether he was a tailor, right? Meaning, regardless of his stature, it's always a flat rate of 30 shekels. Right? If we're concerned about that by onus mefata, then we should also have to be concerned about that by an eved, but that's not the case. Every eved is a flat rate of 30 shekels. So, Ela Reb Zera, so Reb Zera gives a different answer. So how do I know that boshes and pagam is in addition to the 50 shekels? Well, because ilu ba'u alea shnaim. Well, what if this wasn't the first time that there was a situation with this girl of onus mefata? It happened twice. Echad kedarka v'echad shelo kedarka. The first time that it happened, it was shelo kedarka. It was anally, and therefore she remained a basula after the fact. But there would still be the knas by onus mefata, so it would still be 50 shekels. But then the second time it happens, it's kedarka, right? It's regularly. So now says Reb Zera, it wouldn't make sense to say that in both of these cases, it would be the same 50 shekels fine, right? It would be the same 50 shekels total, because by the second time around, she was piguma. She was no longer sort of, whatever, not exactly, I guess not considered, the same, status, right? The second time around, it would be sort of a lower status, we want to assume, than the first time around. So therefore, says Reb Zera, it must be that the boshes and pagam is in addition to the 50 shekels, so that way it's relative, because if it was 50 shekels flat rate, we'll say, well, what happens if it happens twice? Once kedarka, once shelo kedarka, how could it be that both times will be the same exact 50 shekels? Fine. Right, so again, ilu ba'u alea shnaim, echad kedarka v'echad shelo kedarka, yomer, they'll say, ba'al shlema chamishim, ba'al paguma chamishim. I don't understand that if the first time around, when she was shlema, so then it's 50 shekels. How could it be that also the second time around when she's paguma, it's also 50 shekels? So it must be that boshes and pagam are in addition, and those are relative. Omar le Abai. Abai says to Reb Zera, that's also not such a geshmak kasha, because or a proof. Because if that's the case, gabi eved nami. Oichit, when it comes to a slave, Yomru, they'll say, Eved bari shloshim, Eved mukashchin shloshim. We'll say, I don't understand. If you have a slave who's healthy, it's 30 shekels. And also if you have a slave who's a mukashchin, he's diseased, so then, it's also the same 30. It doesn't, right? It should be, they should have different statures, different statuses, right? So therefore, if the reason why it must be that, boshes and pagam are in addition to the 50 shekels, by onus mefata, is because otherwise we'll say, but there are different statuses, so how could it be the same price? But I could ask the same question by a slave, right? You could have a bari and a mukashchin, which are different statuses, and yet it's the same 30 shekels. So Elamar Abaye, so rather says Abaye, you know how I know that the boshes and pagam is in addition to the 50 shekels? Because Omar Kra Tachas Asher Ino. that the pasuk says that he's got to give 50 shekels tachas asher ino, because he, I don't know, it was aner. What does that mean, ino? I guess violated her. So hane tachas asher ino. So the 50 shekels are for tachas asher ino. It's for one specific thing. Implying that there could be other payments, right? So the 50 shekels is tachas asher ino because he violated her. But there's other payments. There's boshes. There's pigam. Rava Amar says Rava. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, V'noson ha'isha shochev imo la'avi anayir chamishim kesef. Rava says that the pasuk says that the fellow who sleeps with her gives her father 50 shekels. Hano ashchiva nun. That the 50 shekels that he's paying is for because ashochev imo, because he slept with her. But michlal tiga boshes ufgam. But there are other things that there's payments for as well. There's boshes payments, pagam payments. So therefore, that's how Abaye and Rava learn out that there's boshes and pagam in addition to the knas, because there's boshes and pagam in addition to the knas, because the knas is for a specific thing. Abaye says it's for tachas asher ino. Rava says it's because for hano ashchiva. But there's also other things. There's boshes, there's pagam. Fine. Ve'em ledida, freg di gemara. But maybe I'll say that the money goes to her. Maybe I'll say that the boshes and the pagam goes to her as opposed to her father. Amar Kra, the pasuk says benurah beisavia. It says that when she's a naira, she's in the house of her father. It says that in the context of nidarim in Parshas Bahar, right? No, what's that called? Matos, I believe. So benurah beisavia, kol shvach nurah leavia. That all of the benefits of her when she's a naira goes to her father. Okay, so we see from the pasuk that therefore the boshes and the pagam goes to the father. But 1 second. Rav Huna says the name of Rab. How do I know that everything that a daughter makes goes to her father? Shenema, as the pasuk says, that the pasuk says that you can have a father who sells his daughter to be a slave woman, a maidservant, a Jewish maidservant. So just like a maidservant, everything she makes goes to her master. So also a daughter, everything that she makes goes to her father. So now the question is, so we said, how do we know that everything that a daughter makes goes to her father? So we say, we learn out from the pasuk of V'chiyim kor isha's bito la'ama, we compare his daughter to an amma. But lamali, why do I need to learn it out from that pasuk? Learn it out from the pasuk that we're learning over here by Boshes and Pagam, say Binureh Beisavia, that it's an umbrella clause to say that anything that she makes, that she produces when she's a naira, goes to her father, and therefore, including the Boshes and the Pagam, would go to her father. So, but we don't learn it out from Binureh Beisavia. We learn it out from a separate pasuk. Why? So, look, the pasuk of Binureh Beisavia is in the context of Afaris Nidarim, that if a daughter makes a neder, the father can annul it. So, but why don't we say, okay, but just like a father can annul, right, has the right to annul her vows, so he also has the right to the boshes and pagam. But we don't learn out money, which is boshes and pagam, from isura, from nidarim. But why don't we learn it out from the knas? That just like the knas goes to the father, right? V'nosan, right? La'avi anara, right? That the 50 shekels goes to the father. So why don't we say that just like the 50 shekels knas goes to the father, so also the boshes and pagam goes to the father. You can't learn out mammon from a knas. But we say, look, it's logical to say that the boshes and pagam were goes to the father. Because the father has the right to marry off his daughter, and he has the right in marrying off his daughter to embarrass his daughter. Right? He can marry her off to a menuvel, to a mukashchin, to whoever he wants. He has the right to sort of humiliate his daughter by choosing some shmendrik to marry her off to. But now comes this other shmendrik, right, the rapist or the seductionist, and he now was poging his daughter. And the father's like, wait, only I can be poging my daughter, only I can humiliate my daughter, not you. And you just humiliated her, and you lowered her value. That was something that I had the right to do, not you. You took that away from me, therefore I deserve to receive the boshes and the pagam. So therefore, it makes sense to say that since this anes or the mefateh sort of took away this right that the father had. So therefore he pays the father that the boshus and the pagam. Pagam roin osa kilui shivchanim keres. We say, how do we evaluate pagam? Sort of the lowering of value, the decrease of value. So we view her as if we were selling her as a slave woman in the market. How do we evaluate her? Amar avur dishmuel omdim kama adam rotzalitein ben shivcha besula l'shivcha bula l'shamsho. So it says avur dishmuel. Well, we say, look, we go to a fellow and we say, are you interested in purchasing a slave woman? And he says, okay, sure. And he says, okay, so now, how much more would you be willing to pay for a besula than for a beula? So shivcha beula l'shamsho manafka lemina. We say, but why should it matter, right? Meaning, you go to a person, you say, you're interested in buying a slave woman. He says, sure. He says, okay, how much are you willing to pay for a beula and how much are you willing to pay for a besula? We'll say, what's the difference? So ela ben shivcha beula l'shivcha she'ena beula la'asiyah la'abdo. It means to marry off to his slave, right? So if you have a guy who's got a slave and he's looking to buy a slave woman for a shidduch for his slave, so, and we say, hey, fellow, how much are you willing to pay for a besula shifcha versus a beula shifcha? But still, why does he care? It's for his slave. So, well, it's a slave who's working really good, and the master wants to treat him to a besula, and therefore, so if you have, so if there would be a besula versus a beula, what would be the difference in value between those two? And that would be the price of the pagam. Says the Mishnah, Kol makom sheyesh mecher ein knas. We've seen this before, that any place where the father has the right to sell his daughter as a maidservant, i.e. when she's a katana, then there's no knas, then there's no knas by onus mefate. V'chol makom sheyesh knas ein mecher. And in any place where there is a fine, i.e. when she's a naira, so ein mecher, so then the father no longer has the ability to sell her as a maidservant. Katana yesh la mecher ve'en la knas. A minor, the father could sell her as a maidservant ve'en la knas, and there's no 50 shekels fine by onus umefate. Naira yesh la knas, there is a 50 shekel fine by onus umefate ve'en la mecher, but the father can no longer sell her as a maidservant. As Rashi points out, that a maidservant goes free when she becomes a naira. She can only be a maidservant until she's a naira. So obviously when she's a naira, the father cannot sell her as a maidservant because she memela goes free. Ha-bogeres ein lo mecher v'lo knas. When it comes to a bogeres, the father of course cannot sell her as a maidservant, and also by onus mefata there's no knas. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yudah Amar Rav, so did Reb Meir. Says Rav Yudah in the name of Rav that this of course is the opinion of Reb Meir, right, who says that there's no 50 shekel fine by a katana. But the Chacham say that when a child is a katana and the father could sell her as a maidservant, there's also a 50 shekel knas by ones umefate. The Tanya is learning a brayso, katana mibas yom echad vad shetovish te sayris. So a katana, from the day that she's born until she becomes a naira, yesh la mecher, the father could sell her as a maidservant, ve'en lo knas, but there is no, right, if there's ones mefate, there's no 50 shekels knas. Mishetovish te sayris. But once she becomes a naira, until she becomes bogeres, yesh la knas, so there's a 50 shekels knas by onus mefate ve'en la mecher. But the father, right, once she's a naira, the father cannot sell her as a maidservant. If Reb Meir, that's Reb Meir, right? Basically, these two stages, naira and katana, are mutually exclusive with regard to the father being able to sell her as a maidservant and with the 50 shekels fine, right? A katana, there's, right, mecher, but not knas. A naira, it's punkt vakert. There is a knas, but no mecher. Divrei Meir, Shoy Reb Meir, Omer, Reb Meir would say, Kol makom sheish mecher in knas, that whenever the father has the right to sell her as a maidservant, there's no fine. V'chol makom sheish knas, whenever there is a fine, i.e. when she's a naira, in mecher, the father cannot sell her as a maidservant. V'chacham Omer, the chacham say, Katana mibas gimel shanim v'yom echad b'ad shetiboger, that a katana from 3 years and a day until she becomes a bogeres, Yesh la knas, there is a fine by onus mefata. Knas in mecher lo. What? There's only a fine by onus mefata, but the father has no right to be able to sell her even as a katana. Ema af knas b'makom mecher. And I'll say even a knas, right? That yes, of course, the father could sell her as a maidservant, but also by onus mefata there would be a knas. Amar Rav Chisda says, Rav Chisda, my time to Rav Meir. How come Rav Meir says that they're mutually exclusive? Amar Krav v'lo siyeh leisha. Well, the pasuk says that by ones, it says v'lo siyeh leisha, and she will be for him as a wife. Mahava atzma kosu medaber. It's talking about that she sort of a girl who has the ability to make her to marry herself off, i.e., a naira, not a katana. So therefore, we're talking about a naira in the context of onus umefata and the 50 shekels knas, but not a katana. We're talking about a naira, not a katana. V'rabonon, with regard to the rabbis who say that it even applies to a katana. Amar Rish Lakish says, Rish Lakish Amar Kra, naira, the pasuk says naira but without a hay. It says naira but without a hay. Afilu katana b'mashma, and since it says naira without a hay, just nun ayin reish, it implies even a katana. Shamar Papa b'd Rav Chanan mi Bei Kluchis, and Rav Papa, the son of Rav Chanan from Bei Kluchis, heard this. Azal Amar Kamid of Shimon bar Ashi, and he said the shtickle Torah in front of Shimon bar Ashi, that according to Rish Lakish, that he explains the opinion of the rabbis who say that the knas by onus mufata applies even to a katana from the fact that the pasuk says naira but without a hay. Amarle, so Rav Shimon bar Ashi responded to Rav Papa Breder of Chanan Bei Kluchis. Amarle atun mehamas nisu. Look, you explain this opinion of Rish Lakish regarding the na'ara with a hay versus without a hay in this context in the context of onus umefate. But we teach Rish Lakish on the following. Amar Rish Lakish says, Rish Lakish amotzi shemra ala ktana potter, that a fellow who's motzi shemra on a ktana is potter. Again, what's motzi shemra? It's come up a few times that you have a fellow marries a nara, and then she's not a besula, and if they're able to prove that she had a relationship with somebody as when she was engaged, so then she's chayev skila. So it says Rish Lakish amotzi shemra ala katana, but if she's not a naira morosa, but she's a katana potter, so then she's not chayev skila. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, v'nosnu lavi a naira, that if he turns out to be a liar, so then he's got to pay 100 shekels to the father of the naira. Naira male dibra kosov, and it says naira with a hay. And therefore, because it says naira with the hay, so Davka it's talking about a naira to the exclusion of a katana. Maskeflar Rav Barahava. Rav Barahava says, I don't understand. Time the cost of Achman a naira lavach yavamina afidu katana. What? That it's just because the pasuk says naira with the hay, that's how we know that a katana is excluded. But the pasuk says that if the guy was telling the truth, lo nintu besula naira, and she was not a besula, and she had a relationship with somebody else as a naira me'orasa, then we stone her. And a katana, you don't punish a katana. A katana can't get skila. And therefore, I don't understand how can you possibly argue that it's only excluding a katana because it says naira with the hay. Forget about naira with the hay or without a hay. If it turns out that it's true that she had a relationship as a naira me'orasa with somebody else, she would be chayev skila, and that can't apply to a katana. Rather, the point is, no. When it comes to Naira Marasa, it's true. When it comes to Motzi Shemra, it's true. We're not learning out from the fact that it says Naira with a hay, but if it didn't have a hay, then we would think it can apply to Ketana. Of course it cannot apply to Ketana because a Ketana wouldn't get skila. However, what we do learn from here is that in this case of Naira, of Motzi Shemra, it must be talking about a Naira. It cannot be talking about a katana because a katana doesn't get skila. So it must be talking about a naira, and it says naira with a hay. So we want to say that by motzi shemra, which must be by a naira, and it has a hay, so let's therefore imply that in every other case where there is no hay, such as by onus mefata, there's no hay when it says naira, it would even include a katana. That would be the opinion of the rabbis. Friends, that was the Daf Mem of Masechta Ksubis. We talked about a few different things today. We had a few different Mishnayos. Right? We saw the opinion of Rabbi Lazar, who said that by a Yisoma as well as by a Naira who gets engaged and then divorced, the money would go to her, which means that by Mefate, seduction, there would be, no payment since it was consensual. And then we discussed Boshes and Pagam, that Boshes is an embarrassment, and that would be a subjective payment. Pagam is how much sort of her value decreased because of this incident. We learned that we had two different options, right? Abaye and Rava, about how we learn out that Boshes and Pagam is in addition to the 50 shekels. One pasuk is from what was it? Tachas asher ina. The other one is v'nosan isha shochev ima. Implying that there's also other payments in addition to the 50 shekel fine. And then we saw the machlokas between Reb Meir and the Rabbanan that we've sort of been aware of since the beginning of the third parak, the second parak already, maybe the third parak, I think, that onus mufata davka applies to a naira and not a ketana. There's no knas by a ketana according to Reb Meir, but according to Chum there is a knas even by a ketana. Friends, that was Daf Mem Masechet Ksubis. Hope you enjoy. Peace out.